The cemetery on the outskirts of the city was the only place Kiara Vaughn could still afford to grieve. The grass was uneven, the headstones leaned at tired angles, and the whole place smelled faintly of rain and neglect even when the sun was out. Nothing here tried to be more than it was. She appreciated that. It made it easier to kneel in front of her mother's modest stone and pretend she wasn't falling apart, one unpaid bill at a time. Today, though, the familiar climb up the hill felt different. Kiara rounded the last curve of the cracked pathway, clutching a bouquet of bright grocery store flowers that had cost her lunch money, and froze mid-step. The plastic wrapping crinkled in her suddenly tight grip. Her mother's grave, usually alone in this forgotten corner where only the poorest families buried their dead, was surrounded. 6 men in tailored black suits stood in a loose formation around the simple headstone like they were guarding something precious. Their shoes gleamed despite the dusty path. Their posture radiated discipline, the kind that came from military training or worse. They weren't mourners. They weren't city workers. They were something else entirely. And at the center of it all, kneeling before her mother's grave with his head slightly bowed and a massive bouquet of white roses laid carefully against the stone, was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of another world. Italian. Broad-shouldered, bearded. With the kind of presence that didn't need announcement. He wore an expensive black suit, the jacket open to reveal a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. Even kneeling, he radiated power, the quiet, absolute kind that came from never having to raise his voice to be obeyed. Kiara's first thought was irrational and immediate. They came to repossess the dead. What else was left to take from people like her? "Hey!" she called out, her voice sharper than she intended, carrying across the quiet cemetery. "What the hell are you doing at my mother's grave?" Every suited head turned toward her in unison. The kneeling man was the last to lift his gaze. When he did, the weight of his attention hit like a physical thing. His eyes were dark, measuring, too focused, like he was evaluating her the same way a predator would assess prey, or the way a king might study an unexpected guest. He rose slowly, unhurried, and brushed invisible dust from his knee. Then he studied her face for a long moment. "Miriam Vaughn's daughter," he said finally. Not a question. A statement. The fact that he knew her mother's name without glancing at the headstone made something cold slide down Kiara's spine. "How do you know that?" she demanded, stepping closer despite every survival instinct screaming at her to run. "Who are you? Some kind of city official? Debt collector?" Behind the man, one of the suits couldn't quite suppress a reaction, something between a cough and a laugh at the words debt collector. The man at the center didn't move. Didn't smile. Didn't flinch. "I'm not from the city," he said, his voice low and deliberate, carrying the faint trace of an Italian accent that made each word sound like it had been carefully chosen. "And I'm not here to ask for anything." "Then why are you standing over her grave like you own it?" The wind caught the edge of his jacket, revealing a glimpse of something dark curling along his wrist, ink, but not the decorative kind. The kind of tattoo that meant something in certain circles. The kind people learn not to look at too long if they wanted to keep walking. "My name is Luciano Costa," he said finally, his eyes never leaving hers. "Your mother saved someone important to me a long time ago. I'm here because I owe her." Kiara's grip tightened around the stems of her cheap flowers until her knuckles ached. "Saved how?" He glanced down at the headstone, then back at her. "In a way that cost her more than she admitted to anyone." She almost laughed, a short, bitter sound that scraped out of her throat. Her mother had worked herself into the ground for decades. 2 jobs, no breaks, no complaints. What more could she possibly have given? "I've been paying for this plot," Luciano continued quietly, his voice steady as stone. "The maintenance. The hospital balance she left behind. Every year." The world seemed to tilt beneath Kiara's feet. She went very, very still. The sound of distant traffic faded. The wind stopped. There was only his words and the thunderous beating of her own heart in her ears. "You've been paying my mother's bills?" she asked, each word careful, like stepping barefoot on broken glass. "Yes." "For how long?" "Since she died." Her stomach dropped. The funeral home had told her someone anonymous had covered the burial costs when she'd been too broke to afford even the cheapest option. She'd assumed it was a church charity. Some stranger's guilt-driven kindness. It had been him. This man. This dangerous stranger kneeling at her mother's grave like he had every right to be there. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. Luciano Costa's expression shifted, just barely, just enough to let something softer show through the controlled exterior. Something that looked almost like grief. "Because 7 years ago," he said slowly, "your mother stepped between a bullet and my daughter. And I will be in her debt until the day I die." Welcome to Underworld Haven. Before we dive into this intense story of hidden debts and dangerous protection, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more captivating stories like this one. Chiara's mind was still reeling when Luciano gestured toward the pathway leading away from the grave. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't quite a request, but it wasn't quite a command either. His men fell back, creating a perimeter of privacy that somehow made her feel more exposed, not less. She followed because what else was there to do? Her legs felt disconnected from her body, moving on autopilot while her thoughts spun in circles. Your mother stepped between a bullet and my daughter. 7 years ago, Luciano began, his voice low and measured as they walked the uneven path between headstones. "I made a mistake. I took my daughter Sophia to a shopping center in broad daylight. I thought it was safe. Thought I'd been careful enough." He paused, jaw tightening. "I was wrong." Chiara said nothing. Just listened to the crunch of gravel under their feet. "There was a man in the parking lot. One of my rivals. He saw an opportunity." Luciano's hands flexed at his sides, the only visible crack in his composure. "Sophia was 2 years old, strapped in her stroller. He raised his gun, and I was too far away. Too slow." The air felt thin suddenly. Chiara's throat tightened. "Your mother was loading groceries into her car 3 spaces over. She saw what was happening." He stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "She didn't hesitate. Didn't think. She just moved. Threw herself between the gun and my daughter." Chiara's vision blurred at the edges. She could see it so clearly. Her mother, always the first to help, always the one who stepped up when everyone else stepped back. Of course she had. Of course. The bullet caught her in the shoulder. Luciano continued, his voice rougher now. "She went down hard, but she stayed between Sophia and the shooter until my men could respond. By the time it was over, your mother had saved my daughter's life and nearly bled out in a parking lot doing it." The scar. The one on her mother's left shoulder that Miriam had always waved off with vague explanations about a bad fall, a workplace accident, something that changed every time Chiara asked. The scar her mother had never wanted to talk about. "She told you it was nothing, didn't she?" Luciano's dark eyes searched her face. "That's what she told me too when I tried to thank her. Said she did what anyone would do. Refused to let me help her beyond covering the immediate hospital stay." Chiara's hands trembled. She clenched them into fists. "So you paid her bills after she died?" she said, her voice flat and dangerous. "How generous." "She wouldn't let me do more while she was alive," Luciano said quietly. "Believe me, I tried. I had my people monitor her situation, sent anonymous assistance when I could. She always refused it. She didn't want anything to do with my world." "Then why didn't you help us when we were drowning?" The words tore out of Chiara like something jagged and bleeding. "When we couldn't pay rent? When she was working herself to death? When I had to drop out of college to take a second job just so we could eat?" Her voice rose with each question, years of exhaustion and grief spilling over. "You owed her, right? Where were you then?" Luciano's expression shifted, something raw flickering behind the controlled mask. "I was trying to keep you alive," he said, steel beneath the quiet. "By staying away. My world doesn't offer help, Miss Vaughn. It offers a target on your back. Your mother understood that. She made me promise to let you live a normal life, away from all of this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the men, the danger, the blood-soaked empire he ruled. "I honored that promise. Until now." "Until now?" Kiara echoed, something cold settling in her stomach. "What's changed?" Luciano's jaw tightened. "My enemies found the grave. Which means they found you." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a gun barrel. Kiara stared at him, trying to process what he just said, trying to make it make sense. "What do you mean they found me?" "Exactly what it sounds like." Luciano pulled out his phone, swiped once, and held it out to her. The screen showed a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance with a long lens. It was her. Last week. Standing right here at this grave with wilted daisies in her hand. Another swipe. Her walking to the bus stop. Another. Her leaving the diner where she worked the night shift. Her blood went cold. "They've been watching for weeks," Luciano said, pocketing the phone. "Waiting to see if you were important. If you were leverage." His eyes held hers, unflinching. "You are. Which means you need to leave this cemetery right now and come with me." "Come with you?" Kiara took a step back, shaking her head. "I don't even know you. You show up here with your men and your money and your—" She gestured wildly at everything around them. "Your mob boss routine, and you think I'm just going to go with you because some people took a few pictures? Those people will do more than take pictures," Luciano said, his voice dropping to something harder, colder. "They'll take you. Use you to get to me. And when they're done, they'll leave what's left of you somewhere. I'll find it as a message." The bluntness of it stole her breath. No sugarcoating. No reassurances. Just the brutal truth delivered like a diagnosis. "This is my world, Miss Vaughn," he continued. "It's soaked in blood and built on violence. I kept you out of it for 7 years because that's what your mother wanted. Because proximity to me is a death sentence for anyone I care about." He paused, something almost like regret crossing his features. "But they've already connected you to me. The damage is done. Your anonymity, your safety, it's gone." Kiara felt the ground shifting beneath her again, the same sensation she'd had when he revealed he'd been paying her mother's bills. Everything she thought she knew, everything she'd built her life around, was crumbling. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why does it matter so much? One stranger saved your kid. People do heroic things every day and nobody hunts down their families 7 years later." Luciano was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her chest ache. "My wife died 3 weeks after Sophia was born. Complications from the delivery. Internal bleeding they didn't catch in time." He looked away, toward the city skyline hazy in the distance. "Sophia is my only child. The only family I have left in this world. Your mother didn't just save a stranger's kid. She saved everything I have to live for." The grief in his voice was so raw, so immediate, it was like the loss had happened yesterday instead of years ago. Kiara understood that kind of pain. She was living it. "So yes," Luciano continued, turning back to her, "I will honor your mother's sacrifice for the rest of my life. And I will keep her daughter alive, whether you cooperate or not." He pulled a card from his jacket and held it out. "My men will follow you home. Pack what matters. You have 1 hour. And if I refuse?" His expression didn't change. "Then I'll have you taken anyway. At least this way, you get to choose what you bring." The drive took 40 minutes through parts of the city Kiara had only seen from bus windows. The SUV's tinted windows turned the world outside into shadows and suggestions. She sat in the back seat with her duffel bag of hastily packed belongings, one of Luciano's men driving while another rode shotgun. Literally. Luciano followed in a separate vehicle, because apparently even traveling required strategy. The estate, when they finally arrived, wasn't what she expected. No ornate gates or ostentatious displays of wealth. Just a modern two-story home with clean lines and large windows, set back from the road behind tall hedges. It looked like any other upper-middle-class house in the neighborhood. Until you noticed the cameras. The reinforced door frames. The way the hedges were positioned to create kill zones. The subtle bulge under the jacket of the man watering the front garden. It was a fortress pretending to be a home. Inside was just as deceptive. Warm hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, children's drawings held to the refrigerator with magnets. It looked lived in, loved, normal. Except for the panic room door disguised as a coat closet and the security monitors built into what looked like a decorative mirror. Sophia. Luciano called softly as they entered. Come here, please. The little girl who appeared at the top of the stairs made Chiara's heart clench. 8 years old, dark hair pulled into a ponytail, wearing jeans and a purple sweater. She was beautiful. She was also completely silent, her eyes too old for her face as she studied Chiara with the wariness of someone who'd learned early that new people meant danger. This is Chiara, Luciano said, his entire demeanor shifting. The cold, controlled Mafia boss was gone, replaced by something gentler, almost fragile. She's going to be staying with us for a while. Can you say hello? Sophia's gaze flickered to her father, then back to Chiara. She didn't speak. Just nodded once, a tiny movement that looked like it took effort. That's okay, Chiara heard herself say, crouching down to be at eye level despite the distance between them. I'm not great with new people either. Maybe we can just be quiet together for a bit. Something shifted in Sophia's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. She nodded again, this time with slightly less hesitation, before retreating back up the stairs without a sound. Luciano watched her go with an expression that broke something inside Chiara. He looked like a man staring at something precious he didn't know how to hold without breaking it further. She hasn't spoken in 6 months, he said quietly. Therapy, specialists, doctors, nothing works. She just stopped. He turned to Chiara, and for the first time since the cemetery, he looked uncertain. Vulnerable. I don't know how to reach her anymore. They stood in the hallway, surrounded by the trappings of domesticity and violence in equal measure, and Chiara understood. This wasn't just about protection. It was about a desperate father who'd run out of options. You have a choice, Luciano said finally, pulling an envelope from his jacket. In here is everything you need for a new identity. New name, new city, new life. Enough money to start over somewhere safe, far from me and everything I touch. He set it on the hall table between them. Or you can stay. Help Sophia. Teach her, talk to her, just be here. Under my protection. In my home. Chiara looked at the envelope. Then at the stairs where Sophia had disappeared. Then at Luciano, this dangerous man who was also a broken father. What happens if I stay? She asked. You become part of this household. Part of her life. He paused. Part of mine. Chiara picked up the envelope, felt its weight in her hands. A new life. Safety. Everything she'd never had the luxury of choosing before. She could disappear, start over, finally stop running on the edge of survival. She set it back down. I'll stay, she said. Luciano's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Relief, maybe? Or concern? Possibly both. You understand what that means? You'll be in my home. In my world. There's no going back once you're in. I understand. And she did. Maybe not the full scope of it, not yet, but enough. Enough to know that walking away from Sophia, from that haunted little girl who'd watched Chiara with those 2 old eyes, would haunt her forever. She'd spent 7 years feeling invisible, feeling like nothing she did mattered. Here she could matter. Here she was needed. The first week was disorienting. The compound ran on rhythms Kiara had to learn like a new language. Mornings were quiet, almost peaceful. She'd find Sophia in the kitchen around 7, eating cereal in silence while watching cartoons on low volume. Kiara started joining her, not forcing conversation, just being present. Sometimes Sophia would glance at her. Sometimes she'd push the cereal box across the table in offering. It was progress measured in inches. The afternoons were different. That's when the men came. Not the house staff or security, the others. Men in expensive suits who moved like violence was always one word away. They'd disappear into Luciano's office, voices low and urgent, and emerge later with grim expressions and new orders. Kiara learned to recognize the signs. When Luciano's jaw tightened in that particular way. When his voice dropped half an octave. When he said someone's name with the finality of a closing casket. She'd watched him on the phone once, through the gap in his office door. "I don't care if he has a family," Luciano had said, his tone devoid of anything resembling mercy. "He made his choice. Make sure the message is clear." Then he'd hung up, stepped out of the office, and immediately softened when Sophia appeared at the top of the stairs asking if they could read before bed. The duality was staggering. This was a man who could order someone's death between breakfast and lunch, then spend an hour doing voices for every character in a picture book while his daughter curled against his side. Kiara didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know how to reconcile the tenderness with the brutality. So she focused on Sophia. She started small. Drawing together. Baking cookies and letting Sophia crack the eggs. Sitting in the garden while Sophia arranged flowers into patterns only she understood. Never pushing for words, just creating space for them if they wanted to come. 3 weeks in, something shifted. They were in the living room, Kiara attempting to teach herself a card game while Sophia watched. Kiara kept getting the rules wrong, deliberately now, making increasingly absurd plays. Sophia's lips twitched. Then curved. Then she made a sound, small, rusty, like something that hadn't been used in so long it had almost forgotten how to work. She laughed. It was barely more than a breath, but it was real. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth in surprise at her own sound, eyes wide. Kiara felt tears burning in her throat but kept her voice light. "Was that a laugh at my terrible card playing? Rude. Accurate but rude." Sophia's shoulders shook with silent giggles, and Kiara looked up to find Luciano standing in the doorway. He'd frozen mid-step, staring at his daughter like he was witnessing a miracle. Maybe he was. The house settled into different stillness after Sophia went to bed. The security lights cast long shadows across the back terrace where Kiara found herself most nights, unable to sleep in a place that was becoming familiar but still felt borrowed. She'd taken to sitting outside with tea, watching the city lights blur in the distance, thinking about everything that had changed in a matter of weeks. Tonight she wasn't alone. "You're up late," Luciano said from the doorway, his voice low to match the quiet. He'd changed out of his suit into dark jeans and a plain t-shirt. It was strange seeing him like this, less armor, more human. "Can't sleep in someone else's house," Kiara said, not looking at him. "Still feels like I'm going to wake up and find out this was all some elaborate dream." He moved to the railing beside her, keeping a careful distance. "Is that what you want? To wake up?" She considered it. A month ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. Now, with Sophia's laugh still echoing in her memory, with the ghost of purpose filling spaces that had been hollow for years, she wasn't sure anymore. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "But I know Sophia needed today. That laugh, when's the last time you heard her laugh?" 8 months. The words came out rough, unguarded. "Before the nightmares started. Before she stopped talking." He gripped the railing, knuckles white. "I've given her everything, the best security, the safest home, specialists, therapists. Everything except you're so busy keeping her safe you forgot she needs to actually live," Kiara said quietly. Luciano turned to her, something sharp in his expression. Not anger. Something more raw. And what would you have me do? Let her go to school where anyone could take her? Let her play in parks where snipers could have clear shots? My world doesn't allow for normal, Miss Vaughn. It allows for survival. Survival isn't living, Luciano. She finally looked at him, meeting those dark eyes directly. And you can call me Chiara. I've been in your house for 3 weeks. I think we're past formalities. He held her gaze, and something electric passed between them in the silence. The space between them felt charged suddenly, dangerous in a completely different way than guns and violence. My wife died 3 weeks after Sophia was born, he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. I held my daughter for the first time while my wife was bleeding out in recovery. By the time I realized something was wrong, it was too late. He looked away, jaw working. I've been operating on autopilot ever since. Every decision, every move, it's all been about keeping Sophia alive. Because I already failed once. I can't fail again. Chiara's chest ached. She understood that weight, that crushing responsibility. She'd carried it for her mother, watching her work herself to death, unable to stop it. You didn't fail, she said firmly. You can't control everything, no matter how powerful you are. Your wife's death wasn't your fault. But Sophia being alive and miserable? That is something you can change. I don't know how to be both, Luciano admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice cracked something open inside Chiara. Protector and parent. Every instinct I have screams to lock her away from the world. How do I? You don't have to be perfect, Chiara interrupted gently. You just have to be present. Not as the boss or the protector. As her father. As someone who sees her as more than something to defend. He turned to her fully now, close enough that she could see the exhaustion lines around his eyes, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. You see that in me? The father underneath everything else? I see someone who reads picture books in different voices, she said. Someone who watches his daughter sleep like she might disappear. Someone who's terrified he's not enough. She paused. I see someone trying. The air between them thickened. His hand moved, almost involuntarily, reaching toward her face before he caught himself and let it fall. You're dangerous, Chiara Vaughn, he said softly. So are you, she replied, but I'm still here. 2 weeks later, Chiara found herself back on the terrace with Luciano. It had become their ritual, the quiet hours after Sophia slept, the space between them shrinking incrementally with each passing night. Tonight he stood closer than usual, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with something darker. Gunpowder, maybe? Or just the weight of the day. I need to tell you something, Luciano said, his voice tight in a way she'd learned to recognize as barely controlled emotion. And I need you to understand what it means. Chiara set down her tea, turning to face him fully. Okay. He looked at her for a long moment, something raw and exposed in his expression. I've spent 8 years keeping everyone at a distance. It's safer that way. Cleaner. No leverage, no weakness, no one my enemies can use to hurt me. He paused, jaw working. But you, I can't keep you at a distance anymore. I've tried. God knows I've tried. Her heart kicked against her ribs. Luciano. I'm falling for you, Chiara. The words came out rough, almost angry, like he was confessing to a crime. And it terrifies me because in my world, loving someone is painting a target on their back. It's giving my enemies exactly what they need to destroy me. The terrace lights cast shadows across his face, making him look both dangerous and devastatingly vulnerable. Chiara's breath caught. She'd felt it too, this pull between them, this connection that went deeper than gratitude or proximity. But hearing him say it out loud made it real. Made it impossible to ignore. I know what I'm asking is selfish, Luciano continued, still not touching her but close enough that she could feel the tension vibrating between them. You should take that envelope. Disappear. Live the life you deserve away from. His phone buzzed. Once. Twice. 3 times in rapid succession. The shift in him was immediate. The vulnerable man disappeared, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating boss. He pulled out his phone, and Kiara watched his expression go from concern to absolutely lethal in the span of a heartbeat. "What is it?" she asked, though part of her already knew. Already felt the dread settling in her stomach. He turned the phone toward her. The screen showed a series of photos, high resolution, taken with professional equipment. Kiara and Sophia in the garden yesterday. Kiara reading on the terrace this morning. Sophia laughing at something Kiara had said, her face lit up with joy that had been absent for months. The message beneath was simple. "We see what matters to you, Costa." "The Morettas," Luciano said, his voice devoid of all emotion now. "Pure ice. They know you're here. They know what you mean to me." To Sophia. He pulled the phone back, already typing something. "I'm having you moved tonight. Somewhere they can't." "No." He looked up sharply. "This isn't negotiable." "You're right, it's not." Kiara stepped closer, closing the distance he'd maintained, and put her hand over his phone. "I'm not running. Not from this. Not from Sophia. Not from you. They will use you against me," Luciano said through gritted teeth. "They will take you, hurt you, kill you just to prove they can. Just to watch me break. Then we deal with it," Kiara said firmly. "Together. But I'm not disappearing into some safe house while you and Sophia face this alone. I chose to stay, Luciano. I chose this life. I chose you." Something cracked in his expression, the careful control shattering. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." She met his eyes, unflinching. "You said loving someone in your world is giving your enemies a weapon. Well, they already have it. The photos prove that. So running now doesn't change anything except leaving you to face this alone." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." Luciano stared at her like she just declared war on his behalf. Then he pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers, his breathing uneven. "You're going to get yourself killed," he whispered. "Not if you don't let them," she whispered back. Kiara knew Luciano would be furious. That's why she'd waited until he was locked in a 3-hour conference call with his lawyers to make her move. Sophia needed to see the world beyond walls and security cameras. Needed to know that life existed outside the fortress, even if it came with risks. "Just a farmer's market," Kiara told Marco, the head of her security detail. 1 hour. Sophia deserves to pick out her own fruit for once. Marco looked skeptical but didn't argue. He couldn't really. Luciano had made it clear that Chiara's requests should be honored unless they posed immediate danger. 4 guards flanked them as they walked through the crowded weekend market, Sophia's hand tight in Chiara's, her eyes wide at the colors and sounds and people. "Look," Kiara said, crouching beside a fruit stand. "Which apples do you want?" Sophia pointed, almost smiled, and for a moment everything felt normal. Possible. Then Marco's earpiece crackled. His hand went to his weapon. "South exit now!" The gunshot was silenced but not silent. Marco went down. Then another guard. Then another, each falling with surgical precision before they could even return fire. People screamed, scattered, chaos erupting like a wave. Kiara grabbed Sophia, tried to run, but hands caught her from behind, strong, professional, efficient. A cloth pressed over her mouth and nose. Chemical sweetness flooded her senses. The last thing she saw was Sophia's terrified face as another man scooped her up, and then everything went dark. Kiara woke to zip ties cutting into her wrists, and the smell of mildew. Basement. Abandoned building. Standard kidnapping location. Her training from Luciano's security team kicked in automatically. Assess the situation, don't panic, wait for the opening. A man stood in front of her. Expensive suit, cruel smile. Moretti had to be Luciano Costa's new pet, he said, circling her like a predator. "You're going to call him. Tell him if he wants you back alive, he'll give us what we want. Territory, products, respect." He grabbed her chin roughly. Smile pretty when you beg, princessa. Kiara spat in his face. He backhanded her hard enough that her vision sparked. We have time to teach you manners. Except they didn't. The explosion came first, the building's front entrance blowing inward with controlled precision. Then gunfire, systematic and overwhelming. Kiara heard screaming, running, the distinct sound of bodies hitting concrete. It lasted less than 3 minutes. Then silence. The basement door kicked open. Luciano stood in the doorway, covered in blood that wasn't his, gun still in hand, his expression absolutely empty of everything except cold, calculated fury. 53 minutes, he said quietly, moving toward her. You were gone for 53 minutes. Behind him, his men secured the building. Kiara saw bodies. So many bodies. Luciano cut her zip ties with a knife that was also bloody, his hands gentle despite the violence still radiating off him in waves. Did they hurt you? Her face throbbed where she'd been hit, but she shook her head. Sophia. Safe. At home with protection, I trust. He cupped her face carefully, examining the bruise forming on her cheek. Something murderous flickered in his eyes. This was the clean option, Kiara. What I wanted to do would have taken days. The Morettas don't exist anymore, Luciano said flatly. Not the leadership. Not the soldiers. Not the associates who knew but did nothing. He pulled her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. I burned it all down. Every safe house. Every connection. Every person who thought they could touch what's mine. Kiara should have been horrified. Should have been terrified of this man who just dismantled an entire criminal organization in under an hour with surgical brutality. Instead, she felt safe. I told you, Luciano said quietly, leading her past bodies and devastation. Loving someone in my world is giving my enemies a weapon. But what they forget is that it also makes me absolutely unstoppable. He looked at her, something fierce and protective burning in his dark eyes. No one touches you again. Ever. Luciano. No one, he repeated. I will burn this entire city down first. And looking at the ashes of the Moretti Empire around them, Kiara believed him. The house was quiet when they returned. Sophia was asleep upstairs, safe with 2 guards Luciano trusted with his life stationed outside her door. The medical team had checked Kiara over, minor bruising, no serious injuries, and disappeared as efficiently as they'd arrived. Everything was under control. Everything was handled. Except Luciano. Kiara found him in his private study 2 hours later, still wearing the blood-spattered shirt, standing over a metal trash can with flames rising from it. Documents curled and blackened, turning to ash. His hands were steady as he fed more papers to the fire, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his jaw. You should be resting, he said without turning around. So should you. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it. How much of that blood is yours? None that matters. She believed him. The violence had been precise, professional. This was a man who knew exactly how to dismantle an organization without taking a scratch. She should be horrified. Should be running. Should be everything except what she actually was. Grateful. I'm sorry, Kiara said quietly. That made him turn. For what? For putting you in that position. For ignoring your orders. For, her voice cracked. For making you do that. Luciano's expression shifted to something sharp, almost angry. You think I did that for you? He moved toward her, still covered in evidence of what he'd done. You think I dismantled the Morettas because you were taken? Weren't you? I did it because they dared to touch what's mine, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Because they made you afraid. Because they put their hands on you and thought there wouldn't be consequences. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. I would have done worse if time allowed. I wanted to do worse. Kiara's heart hammered against her ribs. I know. You should be terrified of me. I know that too. She reached up, her hand hovering near his blood-stained shirt before settling against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, rapid and strong. But I'm not. I should be running. Should be taking that envelope and disappearing. But all I can think is that you came for me. That you burned everything down to get me back. Her eyes stung. And I love you for it. Luciano went very still. Chiara. Not despite what you did, she continued, the words spilling out like a confession of her own. But because I understand why you did it. Because in your world, love means protection. It means being willing to destroy anything that threatens the people you care about. And she swallowed hard. I love you, Luciano. The Mafia boss and the father. The monster and the man. All of it. He stared at her like she just offered him salvation and damnation in the same breath. Then his hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing carefully over the bruise on her cheek. I've loved you since the cemetery, he said roughly. Since you stood there with your cheap flowers and demanded answers from a man whose name makes grown men go pale. You weren't afraid. You were angry and grieving and so damn brave. His forehead pressed against hers. I've been falling since that moment, and I don't know how to stop. Then don't, Chiara whispered. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was air. Like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to something human after hours of being a monster. His hands were gentle despite the violence still clinging to him, cradling her face like something precious he was afraid to break. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Chiara could taste the metallic edge of the night on his lips, blood and ash and choices that couldn't be unmade. This is who I am, Luciano said, his voice raw. This is what loving me means. I know, Chiara replied, pulling him closer. I'm choosing it anyway. Why? She smiled, sad and certain all at once. Because you chose me first. At my mother's grave. When you could have just walked away. He kissed her again, softer this time. A promise. A surrender. An acceptance of everything they were and everything they'd become together. Love born from violence. Sustained by choice. And somehow, against all logic, real. 5 years changed everything. The cemetery looked different in the morning light, softer somehow, less like a place of endings and more like a place of peace. Chiara walked the familiar path up the hill, but this time she wasn't alone. This time she wasn't clutching cheap flowers and crushing debt. This time she had a family. Can we stop at the bakery after? Sophia asked, her voice bright and clear. 13 now, tall and confident, with her father's eyes and a smile that came easily. I promised Nana I'd bring her those lemon cookies she likes. Nana was what Sophia called Chiara's elderly neighbor, the one who'd helped watch her during those early, chaotic months. The one who'd been invited to the wedding 3 years ago and cried through the entire ceremony. Of course, Chiara said, squeezing her daughter's hand. Not by blood, but by choice. By years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and homework struggles. By love that had grown slowly, carefully, into something unbreakable. Luciano walked beside them, his hand resting at the small of Chiara's back. He wore a simple black shirt and jeans, no suit, no guards hovering at a distance. Those days weren't completely gone. He was still Luciano Costa, still a man whose name carried weight in certain circles, but they were different now. Quieter. Legal. The transition had taken years. Systematically dismantling the criminal enterprises, redirecting resources into legitimate businesses, international trade, real estate, tech investments. It wasn't redemption. Luciano had made that clear from the start. He didn't believe in washing away blood with money. But it was transformation, and that was enough. Transformation for Sophia. For Chiara. For the life they were building together. They reached Miriam Vaughn's grave, and Chiara stopped short. The simple headstone she remembered was gone, replaced by something beautiful, polished granite with elegant lettering that caught the morning sun. Miriam Vaughn, beloved mother, she saved a child and changed the world. Tears burned Chiara's eyes. You did this. Last month. Luciano said quietly. I wanted it to reflect the truth. What she did. What it meant. Sophia knelt and placed the fresh bouquet of white roses they'd brought, expensive ones now, but chosen with the same care as those cheap grocery store flowers from years ago. Hi, Grandma Miriam, she said softly. I got an A on my history project. And I'm playing soccer now. Kiara comes to all my games, even when Dad has to work. She smiled. I think you'd like her. I know I do. Kiara's throat closed. She knelt beside Sophia, placing her own flowers, bright, colorful ones, the kind her mother had loved. Thank you, Mama, she whispered, for being brave that day. For stepping between a bullet and a child you didn't know. Her voice cracked. You saved her. You saved him. You saved all of us. Luciano's hand settled on her shoulder, steady and warm. When she stood, he pulled her close, and Sophia wrapped her arms around both of them. They stood there like that for a long moment, a family forged from tragedy and debt and impossible choices. She'd be proud of you, Luciano said quietly into Kiara's hair. She'd be shocked, Kiara said with a watery laugh. Her daughter married to a reformed crime boss. Living in a house with a panic room. Raising a kid who knows 3 languages and how to spot surveillance. Reformed is generous, Luciano said dryly. Reforming then. She looked up at him, at this man who'd burned down an empire to save her, who'd rebuilt himself into something different for their family. Close enough. Sophia pulled away, already heading back down the path. Come on. The bakery closes at noon. They followed, hands linked, leaving Miriam Vaughn's grave behind but carrying her memory forward. The debt had been paid years ago in blood and sacrifice. What remained was something else entirely, something that had grown from ashes and impossibility into something real. Love forged in fire. Sustained by choice. And somehow, despite everything, it was enough. As they reached the bottom of the hill, Kiara glanced back one last time at her mother's grave, peaceful in the morning light. Then she turned toward the future, toward her family, her life, her choice, and didn't look back again. You didn't just watch a story, you stepped into it. This is Underworld Haven, where love is dangerous and every choice has a cost. Subscribe now, to never miss our latest uploads. Because the next story is already waiting, and it's even harder to survive. Your support helps us create even more captivating tales of love and danger.